here this morning. Today we are continuing our series called Thinking Like God, and what we're doing is we're walking through the book of Proverbs, okay? And through this entire book of Proverbs, what you find is it's filled with God's wisdom of how this world works and how the people within it work. And it explains the integral details of just how people function and how systems function in this world. And if you would apply the wisdom that you see in this book of Proverbs to your life, what it does, one, it will protect you from a lot of the pain that people experience in this life. And two, it will actually make you successful in most areas of your life. And the reason for that is God the designer comes down and writes a specific book and goes, here's how people work. Here's how the systems of the world will work. And 3,500 years ago to current day modern man, this is how it will always work, and this is wisdom of how to live your life. The best way I can describe it is this. The wisdom found in this book is most useful, or I would say is only useful as a preventative mechanism, meaning it has to be used on the front side of your decisions. Before you make a decision, you have to look at God's wisdom and then make decisions based within His wisdom. It is not helpful after you've already chosen your own wisdom and gotten yourself into a mess. It's not real helpful while you're in that mess, okay? So the best way I can describe the book of Proverbs is it's preventative rather than medication. Preventative, keeping you from getting sick, rather than a medication that you get after you're sick. Does that make sense? That's how Proverbs is kind of organized for us. Today we're going to talk about this topic. How do you prevent yourself from ever getting caught up in an adulterous relationship? Now, Christy's thinking, why would we talk about that? Now, here's why we talk about that. One, because God didn't write His book according to our holidays. Number two, God spends a lot of time talking about this topic we need to talk about as a church because it's a prevalent issue in our culture today. So, we're going to look at how do you prevent an adulterous relationship in your life. The book of Proverbs, it spends a good chunk of 4 chapters of the book of Proverbs in detail talking about adultery and why it happens and how to avoid it. It spends 4 chapters talking about this, which is great because we live in a society that is saturated sexually. Would you agree with that? Everything now our children are growing up in, that we grow up in, everything is saturated with sexuality. Now, according to some studies, here's what it has found. 60% of men commit adultery at least once in their marriage. The same study states that 40% of women also will as well. So 60% of men, 40% of women. How many of you have heard numbers close to that before in the media? Okay? If you watch the media, you can find several news stories. If you go on Google and ask percentages, these are the percentages that first come up in Google that you will find 60% of men, 40% of women commit adultery in their marriages. Now, I have to assume these staggering numbers are put out by a secular society, and there's a reason for it. In a society that's immoral, where people are having affairs, the way that you avoid what's happening in your life and your failings is you do what? You convince yourself and everybody else around you that everybody's doing the same behavior you are, so it's not really a big deal. So they start producing stats that start saying 60% of men, which means if you have an affair, you're in the majority. So if you're having an affair, you're just like everybody else. And women, 40%. So if you're having an affair, you might not be the majority, but you're not really odd either. I mean, you're pretty much right up there with half the women in the population. It has to be produced to make you comfortable with your sin. Because I actually went and found some accurate numbers from actual research studies on this topic. And here's what they did find out. 22% of men commit adultery at some point in their marriage. So 1 in 5. And about 15% of women do. So 22% of men, 15% of women. They also said that about 17%, so 1/6 of all divorces in the United States are directly related to an adulterous situation in that relationship. So the first thing I want to cover this morning is this. I want to look at what are the common threads that usually lead to an environment where adultery springs up, where adultery becomes part of that relationship. What are some of the red flags in your marriage to look for and to be observant for, to go, ooh, I see that one or I see this one. Doing some research, these are the 5 main reasons, or I won't say main reasons, the 5 environmental issues that happen in a marriage that typically create an environment and a rich environment for adultery to spring up, okay? So these are the 5 things they say. The first one is this: loneliness. They say the first thing is loneliness. A spouse just doesn't feel like they ever see each other and that they actually have a relationship with someone else because they're just kind of crossing paths. Some of the main reasons for this is if you're married to a workaholic who just rarely is home because they're working all the time, or in some cases, both people are workaholics and they never see each other. Another thing they say leads to this one is a traveling job. If you have a spouse who's on the road constantly and they're just constantly gone, it's producing an environment that can lead to, I don't want to say adultery because adultery is never right and there's never a reason for it, but it leads to creating an environment where it's more of a possibility, all right? The other part that leads to that one is kids' activities. I saw in research that said what they're finding a lot is parents that have kids in multiple sports, and even after work, all they do is spend their time running around in sports. And so they just kind of cross in the path of night, and that's what their entire relationship becomes. And loneliness starts to sink in to the relationship, to the marriage relationship. The second red flag they bring up is a lack of conflict resolution. And what they talk about here is people who don't know how to handle conflict in their relationships or resolve it and come out with a positive outcome. So what their marriage is described by is they have constant conflicts that they just bury and they never deal with, and they just keep piling up. And as those conflicts pile up in their background, what happens is the next thing, communication starts to deteriorate. And basically what talking happens between the spouses is literally just about scheduling and to-do list. And their entire life of communication is now just going, what do you have coming up on your schedule, and what do you need to do, and what do I need to do? And that becomes the communication in their marriage. And you just have a lack of conflict resolution because there's so much irritation built towards each other, they don't want to talk about life anymore, okay? Leads to the third red flag, lack of love and affection. This usually goes hand in hand with communication. If you're not talking, you don't feel loved, you don't feel like you're getting affection, and what happens is spouses start feeling like my spouse doesn't care about me anymore, my spouse doesn't love me, and I'm nobody to them anymore. And you start getting this mindset in your head that my spouse doesn't love me, my spouse doesn't want anything to do with me, and you have a lack of love and affection. The fourth one that they bring up is a poor sexual relationship. And what they talk about here is basically in their sexual relationship, boredom, routine, and just kind of going through their emotions starts to describe their sexual relationship. That there's no longer any spark, there's no longer anything new about it or anything with that couple. It's just become a routine, it's just boring, and it's just dull. And they talk about that being a symptom as well. And the fifth red flag they bring up is a lack of intimacy, which is different than sex, gentlemen, okay, just so you know. So a lack of intimacy, the best way to describe a lack of intimacy is this. It's where there's no longer a unique bond between a husband and wife. Is a lack of intimacy. You don't share anything special with each other than you share with anybody else. And so what you become is two people living in the same house that no longer are different than if you were working with a person. You're just two people living together, but it's not really a marriage anymore. Intimacy is gone. There's nothing special between you anymore, okay? Those are the red flags that you need to be looking for within your marriage. Those are the 5 things you see up on the screen. The more of those red flags that you have in your marriage, the riper the environment becomes for adultery. Does it excuse adultery? No, okay? Nothing does. But it is saying it's ripening the environment for that to become more and more of a temptation within the marriage relationship. Couples, families, if you can identify these red flags early so you and your spouse can deal with them, what you can do is you can remove multiple numbers of the ways that Satan uses to destroy marriages through adultery. If you would identify these things, go, we have an issue, we have to start working on it. We got to find a way so these do not describe our marriage relationship, okay? So God gives us some things we'll see here in chapters 5 through 8 of Proverbs, of how we go about resisting the temptations that come with adultery. How is it that we can prevent adultery from ever describing our lives and becoming an action that we indulge ourselves in as individuals and doing the hurt and the pain that it causes in people's lives. So 35 chapters, I found 5 nuggets that I would say are key things. If you would implement these things, if you'd implement this wisdom into your marriage relationship and you as an individual into your brain, it would prevent you from ever getting into an adulterous affair. And I have confidence saying this. If you would apply these 5 things, you wouldn't have to worry about adultery in your life. It's not something you have to be paranoid about. It's not something your spouse would have to be paranoid about, because these things would change how you interact, how you live your life, and it would bring comfort to you and your spouse, and it would eliminate the temptations that lead to adultery in most situations, okay? So here are the 5 truths we find in Proverbs, the 5 pieces of wisdom. The first one is this: you need to stay away from temptation, all right? Here are the 3 Proverbs. Proverbs 5:8, it says this: stay away from her, and it's talking about the immoral woman, okay? Stay away from her. Don't go near her door of her, or don't go near the door of her house. In 6:25, it says, don't lust for her beauty. Don't let her coy glances seduce you. In 7:25, it says this: don't let your heart stray away towards her. Don't wander down her wayward path, okay? The first thing it says here, and women, you can translate this to a guy, same way it talks about a woman here all the time, which is this: you stay away from temptation. Here's our problem I've noticed as human beings and as being followers of Christ a lot of times. God gives us wisdom. God gives us things in our lives to avoid. And what we have a typical habit of doing is, let's just say this bar here is a line that extends out. And we go, this is a line identified in the Bible. You cross it, you now sin. Okay? If you stay on this side of it, you're out of sinful behavior. If you go beyond it, you're just living in sin in that behavior, okay? What we tend to do is this as humans. We see the line and we go, how can I get close to it without going past it? So our mindset becomes, how close can I get to the line before I actually commit a sin, and how can I just inch up to it, and how do I just keep myself from tipping over it or actually touching it? And we look to try to get as close as we can. The problem with that is you're putting yourself in a temptation, in a situation where you are tempted, where it's very easy for you, if I'm this close to the line, just to fall over, right? If I had Rick come up here right now and push me, not that Rick, because he can't push me over, but that Rick, if he could push me over, where am I going to fall right now if he pushes me this way? Am I going to cross the line? Yes. If I'm over here and Rick pushes me down, am I going to cross the line? No. Okay? The first thing we have to do is stay away from temptation. Found research on this. 30% of men admit to removing their wedding bands when they're in mixed company away from their spouses. 30% of men will take their wedding ring off and stick it in their pocket when they're in mixed company and their spouse isn't with them. All right? Is that a sin? No. Is it trying to get real close to the line? Yeah. Okay? They also found this: 68% of men flirt with people of the opposite sex that's not their spouse. Is flirting a sin? Well, it depends. We could come there. Is it getting close to the line? Yeah. Okay? They also found this: 68% of men flirt, 61% of women flirt with people of the opposite sex that's not their spouse. That is flirting with the line of sin, okay? As Christians, what we need to do is this: instead of trying to get close to the line, we ought to be looking for ways to get away from the line so we can protect ourselves. Let me tell you some things I do in my life. Being a public figure, being a minister of this church, and we know what the news media reports are, and we know what the record is of ministers having affairs and stuff. We see it on TV all the time. Those of you who have known me for 10 years and go past that, go back 20 years. Everyone that's ever known me in ministry. One of the things you'll always find out is this: I never have blinds on my windows. In my office. The first thing I did the day one when I came to this church is they used to have like big blinds in my 4 windows, and they were shut. And the first thing I came in is I unscrewed them all and I took them down. That was the first thing I did on day one when I was setting up my office at this church. Why? I don't want there to be any way that people can even suspect that I'm having an affair, having secret meetings, or even with a woman alone without that public space being open. Another thing you will see: there's not a woman in this church who has ever driven anywhere with me alone. Guarantee it. There's never been any female in my ministry history that's ever driven with me anywhere alone. I will say that's changed maybe in the last year. A couple times, maybe I had who did I have? I would say if you're over maybe 80, I have once. And there's this, I think a kid, I don't know which one, maybe Jillian. Jillian, have you ever driven with me in the car alone or something? I take you home once. And there's Jillian, because I've known her since she was like a baby. So she's like my own daughter and stuff. So outside of those 2 times, I don't think there's a time any woman is ever in a car with me, ever alone. If a woman is here at the church and I'm talking to them, most of the time I'm going to have their spouse outside the door because I'm going to separate them, but I'm going to talk to them one-on-one, but their spouse is here with me. Or there's always a staff member here. If you show up at the church here and you want to meet with me and I don't have another staff here, I just don't meet with you. Okay? So I'll tell you, you have to wait outside if it's someone I don't know well or someone from the community. I tell them you can't come in the building right now because I'm the only guy here and you can't come in as a female. That's just how it works. So what I've done is this. I set up a whole bunch of things to keep me from that line that I don't even get close to it. Me and Steven, it was kind of funny. We were talking recently about this very topic, and we were both sitting there scratching our heads because neither one of us could imagine how you ever got yourself in a situation where you like had an affair. And we were both just like, I don't even know how you get to that place, like what steps would even get you there. And then we started to figure it out and went, oh, that's how, No, just kidding. We were just sitting there going, we can't even comprehend it in our lives because the way we think and the things we have structured in our life, it's so foreign to us, we can't even comprehend it. Now, here's the thing. If you're someone that gets up to the line, you can comprehend it. There's a lot of different things you can figure out how you would get there or how it could happen. If you're far away from it, it's foreign to you. So the first thing Proverbs teaches us to stay out of an adulterous situation is stay away from the temptation, okay? The second thing we see is this. We need to make sure that we keep a playful passion alive in our marriage. Listen to Proverbs 5, verses 15 through 19. It says this, drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your spring in the streets, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Well, that part, it must have been great back then, the comment just on that you look like a deer or a loving doe. But in this current day, it doesn't translate as well. But then it says, let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. Okay, the second piece of wisdom we get here to prevent adultery is this. Keep a playful passion alive in your marriage. This is what I mean by that. You need to flirt with your spouse. I know you flirted with your spouse before you got married. You need to continue to flirt with them even when you are married. Whether you've been married for 2 years or 45 years, you still need to flirt with your spouse. You need to keep that active and alive in your marriage. It needs to be something that's there. Guys, you once knew how to do it when you were courting them. You can still do it when you're married to them, okay? It's okay to flirt with your spouse. Nobody else, but with your spouse, yes. Women, you need to flirt with your husband, okay? Let him know you're attracted to him. Let him know that you like him. Flirt with him the same way you did when you were dating him and trying to woo him in, to put the ball and chain on him so he'd be stuck to you forever. You still need to do that. You still need to flirt with your husbands and let them know that you find them attractive and that you love them. One of the things I can say here is John and Sonia. We mock you all the time, so I'm doing it publicly now. Every time they come to a red light, what do you do, John? You kiss your wife. All right, see? And then he makes all the rest of the husbands in our small group look horrible because we're like, good job, John. Thanks for raising the bar on us. But he always kisses his wife when they get to a red light, okay? Simple little things like that, flirting. The other thing, you still need to date your spouse. Whether you have no kids or you have 6 kids, you need to find time to go on dates with your spouse when no one else is around and you can focus directly just on the 2 of you, all right? You need to continue to date your spouse. You need to keep a playful passion alive, and that should not be spent on anybody else. If you're thinking about flirting, if you're thinking about dates and stuff like that, it should always be about your spouse and finding creative ways to do that in your own marriage, okay? That's what Proverbs teaches us. The third thing is we need to remember the grass isn't greener, and I just say it this way, you're probably just colorblind, okay? Everybody at times thinks the grass is greener somewhere else. So especially in the midst of rough circumstances, people like to look somewhere else, compare it, and go, that's a greener grass than what I have, okay? And what I want you to know is it's being colorblind. One of the things I deal with marriages a lot, those of you who had me for marriage counseling, is because I'm a minister, they think I have like a really great marriage all the time. And one of the first things I let them know is as I come to counsel you, My marriage has rough spots too. We have conflict. We've had rough patches. We've had struggles just like you. We're no different than you. Our marriage isn't necessarily better in some ways than yours. It's better in other ways, and there's things that we have learned. But we don't have a perfect marriage. It never has been. It never will be. We struggle like every marriage struggles. So if you think the grass is greener somewhere else, it's really not. It's just you're colorblind and you're not looking at it right. Here's a couple of Proverbs. Proverbs 3, 5 through 4, or 3 and 4. It says this: "For the lips of an immoral woman are as sweet as honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil." So yeah, it looks good. "But in the end, she is as bitter as poison, as dangerous as a double-edged sword." So it looks good, but it's not in reality. 7:5, it says this: "Let them protect you from an affair with an immoral woman, for listening to the flattery of a promiscuous woman." Just saying the right things to you. This is one of the things I find with couples who end up having an affair is they get flattered by someone and they hear nice things at work from someone and they don't hear it at home as much. So they hear those flattery things and it makes them get rose-colored glasses. It makes them think the grass is greener somewhere else and realizing it's not. Understand, lust blinds you, okay? When you start lusting for someone, you do not see them clearly anymore. This is one of the reasons that God says sex is to be used within a marriage relationship, only in a marriage relationship. Why? If you have sex outside of a marriage relationship, it clouds your vision of the person that you are having sex with. Okay, I don't know the right words I'm supposed to be saying here, but anyways, we're in church. It clouds your vision, meaning this. I have seen multiple times, and I bring this up when I have my sex sermon I do about every year and a half. It clouds your vision. I've seen multiple times dating couples who start having sex, and there are very unhealthy behaviors in that relationship dating-wise, meaning it's an abusive situation, there's things that are not good, and one person or the other in the relationship can't see it because they're too emotionally involved because they're having sex with them. And lust clouds their vision from being able to see something and going, if you go down this road and you continue to go down this road with this person and end up getting married, this stuff's not going to stop and it's going to get worse. And then they go get married, and then when the glasses come off eventually, they go, look at all this bad stuff. And I've said this before. I sit back multiple times and go, we told you about all that stuff multiple times. You just chose not to look. You chose not to listen. Why? You were blinded by lust. It doesn't allow you to see clearly. Couple of interesting stats. Only 8% of people that have an affair actually marry the person they committed adultery with. Only 8% of the relationships where someone has an adultery end in a marriage. And of that 8%, 93% of them end in divorce within 5 years. 8% get married, 93% of them end in divorce within 5 years, with lives just ruined everywhere around them. Okay? The grass is not greener. You're just not looking at the scenario in the right way. Number 4, remember an affair will ruin you and your family. Okay? It's not just about you. It's about you and many more people. Here's what it says, Proverbs 6, 27 through 29. It says, "Can a man scoop a flame into his lap and not have his clothes catch on fire? Can he walk on hot coals and not blister his feet? So it is with a man who sleeps with another man's wife. He who embraces her will not go unpunished." 6:32 says this, "But the man who commits adultery is an utter fool, for he destroys himself." And in 7:21-22 it says this, "So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once like an ox going to the slaughter." Okay? It is very clear when you read the Proverbs in these 4 chapters about adultery that adultery will ruin you and it will ruin your family. An affair affects you, your spouse, your children, your extended family, and you also have to remember this, all those same people on the other side with the person you slept with. All those lives are affected by you having adultery. It's not just about 2 people. It's about a whole bunch of people, and you have to realize and keep that in your mind adultery is not just two people, it's a lot of people, and it ruins a lot of people's lives, okay? And you have to keep that in the forefront of your lives. It leaves a path of destruction in the lives of many, many people. The fifth thing that we see in Proverbs here of how to prevent adultery of being part of your life is this. Remember, God sees everything. God sees everything. There is nothing you do that's actually done in secret. The things you think that are done in secret are only done in secret because you hid them from other people, not because you hid them from God. God sees everything. Proverbs 5:20 and 21 says this, "Why be captivated, my son, by an immoral woman, or fondle the breast of a promiscuous woman? For the Lord sees clearly what a man does, examining every path he takes." So the fifth thing you have to remember is this. You don't do anything in secret. You think you're real clever if you're thinking about having adultery. If you think you're getting up close to that line, I'm going to step across it a little bit. You think you're doing it in secret because no other human knows except that other person. God knows. He's everywhere. He sees everything. And at the end of the day, he's the guy you have to stand before and you have to answer for the things that you have done. You won't stand before me. You won't stand before anybody else in here. You will stand before God, and his eyes are everywhere. So on top of everything else, if you would just remember that God's eyes are everywhere, it would hopefully help you step back from the line. Now, I'm talking today about adultery, but here's the thing. Most of the things I'm talking about here can be applied to just sin in general. And if you would apply those things in the front of your program we just went through, and sin in general, it would help you step away from the line and stand back here in your life rather than standing over here where you keep dabbling over and getting knocked over the line. Okay? In the Old Testament, a lot of the times, God describes our relationship and the relationship of Israel with adultery. And what he says is this, is that the comparison he makes is, you are to be my bride. You are to be my people. You are to love me and love me only, and I am to be your husband, is the way God sets the relationship up. And he says, every time you go worship other gods, every time you go worship other things besides me, you're going off and having adultery in your relationship with me. And that's how God describes the relationship of Israel many times in the Old Testament to himself, as going, you've committed adultery on me multiple times, but then he ends it always with this, but I loved you enough to love you through it. And I still forgive you, and I will still call you back. The minute you're willing to turn back to me, I will always bring you back. And it's an amazing love story in the gospel where Jesus finally descends and comes down here and gives his life for us. And it's God saying this, you've committed adultery on me multiple times, and it doesn't stop my love. My love still is for you. I still desire you to the extent that I will give my life to still redeem you. And through that, we see the ultimate love story of God, which is, in spite of all of your junk, I don't care. I love you more than that junk in your life, and I will take you back, and I will give my life to redeem you from this life that you have chosen to live. So as we talk about adultery today and our own personal relationships with God, I want you to also know you apply these same general things to sin, and they apply. Think about it. Most sin, the world tells us the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, does it not? God says live here, and the world tells you you're missing out if you're not doing the stuff we ask you to do. And you have to realize, no, if I live in God's wisdom, it brings a better outcome. This is not what it's perceived to be. All right? God displays the greatest love story of all time to us that way. If we can identify the red flags in our marriage that create a favorable environment for adultery, and if we remember the wisdom that God provides us here in Proverbs, we can actually neutralize the temptations that lead to adultery in our lives. And beyond just neutralizing that temptation, we can also improve our marriage, we can improve our lives, and we can improve the example we lay before our children. Implementing God's wisdom into your life, thinking like God, always leads to the best outcome for your life. So embrace it. Use it on the front side of decisions, not after you get yourself in a mess. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father,